Welcome to COGS, the Inventory Success Podcast, where we discuss how the top operators source, manufacture, finance, and sell their inventory in order to create successful businesses. I'm your host, Mike Gelb. I'm the community manager here at MFD. At MFD, we help SMBs manufacture, finance, and distribute inventory in new sales channels. Now, I know this is a free podcast, but wherever you're listening from, if you're enjoying the show, if you can please hit that subscribe button and like this episode, whether it's YouTube, Spotify, or Apple, that would be amazing. Our guest today is Jimmy Feeman. Jimmy is the co-founder of NoBaked Cookie Dough. NoBaked Cookie Dough makes chef-driven cookie dough that's meant to be eaten raw, straight from the jar. We focused this conversation, what I really found really interesting time with Jimmy was the different iterations of NoBaked Cookie Dough. They first started by opening their own stores, and even franchising stores, and then transitioned to DTC, and then transitioned to wholesale retail. We talk a bit about margins, the strengths and challenges of each channel, owning your own stores, franchising some of those stores, also DTC and also wholesale, why they're very, very gung-ho and focus on wholesale at this time, and as well as which wholesale channels make the most sense. I really enjoyed this conversation. Without further ado, here's Jimmy. Jimmy, thank you so much for joining me here today. How are you?
Thanks for having me on, Mike. I'm good. A little cold here in Nashville, but we're good.
What is cold in Nashville?
Cold. It's been really cold lately.
Is that like 40 degrees? Just give me like an idea, since I've always envisioned
I'm dead
Nashville.
Serious. It's been like 20. It's been like 20 degrees.
Oh, below
like 20
freezing.
degrees.
Wow.
15 in the morning. Yeah, it's been cold. It's been really, really cold.
So actually cold. Okay. Wow.
Yeah, abnormally cold. It's strange though. It's not always like this. In January though, we get a cold snap every year, and that's right now. That's what's happening.
So, NoBaked Cookie Dough. Tell me a little bit about what was the origin story? What was the aha moment? Why did you want to start baking cookies?
So when NoBaked originally started, Megan was working in the music industry, my wife and my co-founder, and then I was working in like a finance job that I'd gotten out of college. We did not really have a lot of like satisfaction with our jobs. And I think that drives a lot of people to say like, what could I do? And when you're really young, I think there's this barrier put up between like you and actually like doing the thing. You think that it's like you have to do all these other steps before you can do the thing. Megan didn't have that. So Megan comes from an entrepreneurial family. So her first thought when she despised her job was, maybe I can do something. Maybe I could sell something that I already make. And she had this cookie dough recipe that she had been making when we were in college. And she was like, I think I could sell this. Came home one day. We were living together at the time. And she looks at me and she's like, hey, I think I'm going to quit my job. I think I'm going to sell my cookie dough. And I was like, go for it. Like, what could go wrong? And for reference, like me at the time at 23, I think I wasn't thinking about it very hard. And that was probably like the beauty of it, because when you're not thinking about it very hard, you make those decisions that you may not have made because of fear, because you have no fear, because you don't know what's going to go wrong. And had we known all the things that we went through for the last 8 years up front, I don't know if we would have started. But Megan got started. That was March of 2017. October of 2017, by then I had quit my job, which my parents were super happy about. And we at 23 leased a building in Nashville and built our first scoop shop. And that was kind of the beginning of the brand. So like originally we were a restaurant brand. Like we had dessert shops where we scooped cookie dough, made milkshakes, did all kinds of different desserts for people. And then as we evolved, and as like the world evolved, we pivoted the business quite a few times. But that's kind of the origin story. It was just a summer of us doing pop-up events, doing all the things that I think a lot of CPG brands do in the beginning. You know, you go to the farmer's market, you post up and do a pop-up event somewhere, you sell your product, you get consumer feedback, you hone in like what your SKUs are going to be. We just took it a different direction, like a huge left turn for a few years, and then eventually ended up right back in like the packaged product realm, which is really funny, but that's how the brand started. And then we went into the scoop shop thing and eventually found ourselves right back with like, hey, we're gonna sell jars of cookie dough.
So it started off with, from a distribution standpoint, starting to do pop-up events and also going into food service. Well, into dessert shops and actually and those types of places. In the dessert shops, were you able to build your brand NoBaked through the dessert shop? So
Yeah, so the shops were branded. The shops were branded under
oh,
our brand.
okay.
So yeah. So we opened our first shop. So like our first physical retail store. Our first physical retail store was opened in October of 2017, and then by October of 2019, we'd opened 9 of them, which I don't recommend for anybody. Don't do that. Don't ever do that. It's a bad idea. But when you're young and you're learning like how am I gonna like run this business, how am I gonna grow, how am I going to scale, you make a lot of mistakes. And I think the beauty of it is if you're willing to pivot and you're willing to let things die, you can keep on with the product and figuring out where it belongs in the world. Um, but man, it was a lot of fun. And it did help build the brand a lot. I mean, it's what gave us all of our followers on social media. It's what gave us the viral videos of lines outside of grand openings of stores. It's what gave you a lot of content and also a lot of consumer feedback. During that time, we sold our product to millions of people in a bunch of different metro areas, and it gave us a really big insight into like what do people like about our cookie dough, what do people hate about it, what do people want to buy it for, and like what do they actually want to do with your product, and then like on the flip side, like what do they not want to do, like what does nobody want to do that you thought they wanted to do, and that was really insightful. Looking back on it, I wouldn't change it at all, other than the fact I would recommend don't open a bunch of stores before a pandemic. Don't do that. That's a bad idea.
So it seemed like also you opened them quite quickly in terms of you started off on your one store and then you quickly expanded to 7. Was there something that you thought was working about the first one that then you thought, okay, let's duplicate this and actually expand? And if so, what was that one or two things that you thought was really working?
The things that really were working for us, specifically in like the world that we were living in, is our margins were really good. And I think that good margins inform a lot about how you should price a product and what you should do as far as scale. But what they can do is they can also trick you into making risks or taking risks that are a little too big. And I see that with DTC brands a lot. I see it with restaurant brands like what we were, where you have a really, really good gross margin and you forget about the other things that actually like technically get you to like that real contribution margin. And the thing in the restaurant business that does it is rent and labor. So those are the two other details. And we had really simple, easy to operate stores. Um, we had a really, really good staff in Nashville, and Megan and I had put a lot of time into building the brand in Nashville. When we opened up that second store, we repeated a lot of the same processes, but we did them faster. Eventually what that did is I think it led us to like not building the brand with as much energy in each metro area that we opened, which is why sales declined at each store that we subsequently opened. They just never hit the same peak that they hit or the sustainability they hit in Nashville. They didn't have the same brand awareness and energy. The second thing that we learned is gross margins not everything. What really matters and what you have to think about is the whole picture. Like, what is your contribution margin on your unit? And I think that actually informed a lot of what we do today in CPG and how we run the company, because we're always thinking about like how much money are we actually making when we sell a thing versus like how much money can we dilute ourselves to think maybe we could make, but you're not actually taking home. I see it with D2C brands with advertising, and the reason I see it is because that was us. The second pivot that we took was into D2C, and you spend a bunch of money on ads thinking like I have really good margins, and then you hit the shipping costs, and then you hit customer returns, and then you hit like all of the other things that operators should be thinking about. And then when we pivoted into CPG and started doing grocery, um, it was kind of like a last ditch effort for us to figure out like where should this product live. But what we ended up doing is coming into it with all of this back experience of like here is what you should probably look out for. Um, and I think because we were so young, it like allowed us to make more mistakes than we normally would have. which ended up being a really, really good thing because you learn a lot more from messing up than you do from like doing something correctly. Because you never really know what you're supposed to be watching out for, and you'll eventually hit those pitfalls. I think hitting them when you're really small, that's the way to do it. And that's kind of what's informed like how we've grown the brand over the last 8 years.
That's awesome, and I mean, really, really good piece of advice. There's a lot there. I want to start with on the growth margin piece, and love to like dig in a little bit into your supply chain. Why were the margins so good? Was it because you all were actually, making the cookie dough yourselves? Was it because a lot of this was verticalized when it comes to the actual manufacturing piece for the products?
Yes, that was part of it. The other part of it, which I think is the biggest, if you talk, which you see a lot of like small CPG brands or small, I'd say they're like small farmers market brands. And we made this mistake in the beginning too. They think about their gross margins, their food cost, and their packaging cost, and they forget that labor and overhead exist. And so the price of their unit when they're making it in their like commercial kitchen, shared kitchen, whatever environment it might be, and then taking it to the farmer's market, they're also selling it direct to consumer. So what they'll do is they'll say, well, my food costs to make my jar, this is theoretical, are $2.50. And I sell this thing at the farmer's market for $10. I have 75% gross margin. And really, what they're not understanding is that in order to scale or in order to really account for what's happening, like you have your rent, your utilities, your labor, all of the hands that went into making the jar itself of whatever product it is, it could be peanut butter, it could be cookie dough. And so that was the first mistake. So it really was us just looking at like that and saying like, oh, these margins are really good. The second thing was the fact that we were making the product. Um, and that's something that we can talk about more. But like today, Megan and I run a commercial bakery. We make all of our own products. Um, that is a journey in and of itself. It's a completely different business, but it is what has allowed us to be a lot more scrappy and a lot more profitable than some of the other, I think, players in the space. It is a huge nightmare as far as like running an operation for the first like 12 months. You got to like figure out what's going on. You have to hire staff. You have to build the line. You have to mess up. You have to build all of the SOPs for your new facility. But I think it's an investment that's really worthwhile for if a brand is in the right place or it has the right talent. So like Megan and I are really good at that. And so we recognized that, we leaned into it. There's some other things we're not so good at.
I'd love to like expand on that in terms of how your supply chain has maybe changed from then to now. So then you both were still doing it yourselves when it comes to you renting out a commercial kitchen, but of course you don't own that commercial kitchen, but you're doing it yourself on a, maybe if it's fair to say, a more of a small scale when you were then putting it distributing the cookie dough and your different products into these 7 stores. Now it seems you actually bought or actually built your own factory line in order to produce all the amount of products. Is that right?
Yeah. And there's a long journey to get there. So like over the last 8 years, it's changed multiple times. And I'll kind of give some insight into like how it changed and why. So in the beginning, you have like the initial model, which is like I'm making it in my commercial kitchen, shared kitchen, taking it to the farmer's market. Then that transformed into us making the dough and the product in each retail store that we owned, each scoop shop, each restaurant. Um, and then that model transitioned when we went to D2C to say this isn't sustainable. We had a huge scale up in the summer of 2020, like I think a lot of other D2C brands had. And we were approached by a co-packer, and they were like, "We'll make your products for you." Um, gave us kind of the comparison, really helped me understand a lot of the things I was not looking at. And so we partnered with that co-man in 2020. And the price of our product increased as far as like, from our perspective, like the COGS themselves were a little higher. Um, it did allow us to be a lot more hands off, focus on sales and marketing, and have a much more, I would say, resilient supply chain because we could deal with the like huge increases in demand a lot faster than say if you were like building a facility. It's going to take a long time to build. You can't just build it overnight. You can't scale it up and down. There are a lot of problems if you have your own plant. And I think having a co-man is a really good idea. But what happens to us, and I think what happens to a lot of other brands, we're a very niche product. Um, our volume never got very high, and to this day still has never been what I would consider large as a brand in CPG. And so you end up in this trap where you're going to have really bad gross margin simply because you don't have a lot of volume. And if you go back to the basics, you go back to first principles and you start talking about like, what does it actually cost to make our jar of cookie dough? How much would we pay? Like if we were paying the labor or we were doing all of the things that this co-man is doing, since honestly their process is really manual right now because we're a really small brand for them. If we got some of the equipment, we got a space, we did the thing, like how much would it really cost? And you can do that analysis and then you can say, okay, at this point, whatever that point might be of sales, we can afford to have a facility. It's usually based on overhead and like what's out there. So our first kitchen that we got, that when we brought it back in house, this was early 2023. We brought the product back in house. We had been through three different co-men, different experiences of each. That some were good, some were bad, some were awesome, and some were accommodating, and others were not great. Um, we eventually switched back to in house because we found a kitchen that we could use. We shared it with one other brand. It was a building that was kind of divided in half, office warehouse space. Back was built out as a kitchen. Another brand had been in there. We split it with this other brand where they took one side, we took the other side, and our rent was really low. Because it was a situation where we were sharing the kitchen, and then we rented it out to some other local brands and operators to use as storage space. So we were able to like solve the overhead problem, and then from there figure out how to make our jars cheaper than what they had been being made for at the co-man. But it was a really big operational lift and a really big learning curve. And I think unless you really care to do that stuff, like you're actually going to enjoy it, you should not. Um, but as far as supply chain goes, it would say it entered like a thing where we weren't able to scale up and down as fast because of what I referred to before, which is you're a small manufacturer, you're not just going to ramp up production. And that caused some issues for us in 2024 that we got through. But it's definitely hard. And it's not recommended, I think, to someone who's not really, really into the idea of running their own manufacturing facility. You have to want to do that and enjoy it and enjoy getting in the weeds, enjoy getting into the like really nitty gritty things, enjoy the idea of like learning each piece of machinery, how it works, where you can use it, how you can be scrappy. But those are problems that we liked solving. And so that's kind of how our supply chains evolved over the last 8 years.
Working with the co-man. So what were first of all, what were the reasons why you actually changed co-mans three times during that era of the co-man journey?
Yeah, so 3 year journey, three different co-men. I think we ended on like the best one that we worked with, but there were still issues there. With the first one, we were promised a lot up front. And Megan and I were, to be honest, like still very young, very new at doing this thing. We'd only been running NoBaked for about 3 years. We were in the middle of the pandemic. We had never done CPG before. We had been approached by Komen before to make all of the products for, say, our scoop shops. But we had never had serious conversations. So when we were approached, they had made a lot of promises as far as helping us sell the product into grocery that never materialized. The second thing that never really went well is there were a lot of expectations on our end and their end that didn't get met, that all were like spoken about and then not done. So, for being an example, we told them we're a D2C brand, there are a lot of SKUs. The volume is not reflective of the revenue. Because when you're selling a product D2C, you're going to make a lot of money on it revenue wise because you own the entire vertical chain. You're not selling it to a distributor who then sells it to a grocery store who then sells it to a consumer. So the volume itself of pounds of cookie dough was not really there compared to like say a brand in the grocery store doing similar revenue. Um, they were under the impression it was going to go up, but they didn't necessarily tell us that it had to. And we asked multiple times, like, are you okay with that? And they said yes. Eventually, they were not okay with that. And that caused a lot of issues with us and them, where originally there was no MOQ, and then they wanted to add an MOQ later. And there were a lot of things like that that happened where it was just miscommunication. And I talk about this a lot now with brands that either want us to co-pack for them or they want a recommendation on what they should do as far as a co-packer. Expectations up front are so important because it will cause a relationship to sour so quickly, especially when someone's making your product. The second reason that we left the first co-man was there were a lot of issues quality-wise. Um, when someone says they can make your product, they should be already making that product. They were not already making our product. They were not making any cookie doughs. They were not making any cookies. They had a line that they could repurpose that they would have been using for bars to make our product. And because of that, I think they went into it with the same mindset we did, which is we'll figure it out. And that's really bad if you're contracted to make someone else's product. So there were issues like labels on crooked, labels on upside down on a jar, which is strange. Jar is not sealed properly. Um, there was even a jar that had a screw inside of it. And it wasn't like a small screw, it was like a bolt. Like it was very strange. And luckily, we actually caught that at our facility checking jars. Um, so there were a lot of weird things that happened. And I think it was because one, expectations weren't set up front, and two, they weren't familiar with making that product. So when we switched Coman, it was the first question we asked, like, do you guys make cookies? Like, do you make anything that's like a cookie dough? And the next time that we switched Coman was mostly for different reasons. It was for supply chain issues that were really revolving around like us being able to get ingredients to the place geographically. It didn't make any sense. And then that third switch to doing it in-house was just driven by a pure need to survive. So our margins and our volume weren't going to let us maintain our business into like perpetuity, and it became very obvious. And so that third change was just driven by the way to allow our business to survive and then maybe thrive later is to bring that stuff in house, change up the capital structure, and allow us to have higher gross margins and have a business where we were EBITDA positive. So that was something that we made, or that was a decision that we made because we wanted to keep doing NoBaked. And so we were kind of between a rock and a hard place with that one. But with the other ones, I would say it's always about quality and communication. And those things sour relationships so quickly.
No, that's no, I appreciate you walking us through that. When you also were working with Comans, was it more turnkey, meaning they were actually doing all the sourcing of the raw ingredients, or were you all doing the sourcing of raw ingredients yourselves?
That changed from Coman to Coman. So with the first one, it was turnkey, and then again, like it was turnkey, and then they wanted us to do it. It was more nonsense there. Just they were like, "Can you guys start doing this?" And I was like, "No, I don't. That makes no sense." And then after that happened, even more problems happened where we would order materials based on the PO we were going to make, and then they would say that they ran out. And I was like, if you actually ran out, the waste on like this specific item is like 20%, which doesn't make any sense. Like, how is that possible? So there were little things that kept like going wrong. And again, I would recommend again like just having a very clear expectation set up front. But I think turnkey is better. Turnkey allows the whole entire process to move and flow so much more easily. And you don't have a bunch of cooks in the kitchen trying to do the same thing, which is not good.
Walk me through as well. So obviously the pandemic hit, and then it was, I'm sure, like an oh crap moment, just like for many people or most people that obviously had retail businesses. That was really, really challenging a period for everybody. What was your thought process? Because you still had the stores. Was it to, obviously we had to close the stores for a period of time, but when you pivoted for D2C, and just like, a lot of brands had to do, did you think that, what, maybe we'll just close down these stores permanently and really go like fully our only sales channel is going to be D2C?
Yes. And I'll tell you why. So Megan and I had a conversation. We had a lot of tough conversations at the end of 2019. Um, we grew way too fast. We took on a lot of debt to build some of those stores. And like December of 2019, we were out of money. Out. It's all gone. It's no money. There's 9 stores, which is cool. But there's no money. And there's cash flow, I guess. It's the winter time with the dessert brands. You're not going to make a lot of money. So we also had franchisees. So we didn't own all of the stores. So we get together in December of 2019. And with our franchisees, we come up with a set of values, a mission for the company, things that we had never had before. And we also came up with a plan to attempt to fix things. These things were clearly, they weren't broken yet, but they were on the path to a very, very bad place. And so we said to ourselves, like, we have to figure out how to make these stores work. Um, and then Megan and I, after meeting with the franchisees in the meantime, said, well, we haven't sold online since 2017. Why? It doesn't make any sense. We could just fulfill the online orders out of the original store. We have a ton of space. It's a very big store. Um, let's turn the online store back on. And that was January of 2020. I think that a lot of entrepreneurs do stuff like that, especially when they're younger. We didn't have very good mentors or anything at the time. I had read some books, one of them being The Lean Startup, that was very helpful for me thinking about this at that time. I read The Lean Startup in February of 2020. I was like, we have to pivot. Like, we have to pivot. But you kept saying it, but not doing it. Like, you kept saying, like, I was going to pivot. I'm going to change. I'm going to lose weight. Whatever it might be. People say the stuff, and then they just don't. Or they hold on to something while attempting to do the other thing. And the pandemic kind of, like, kicked us off the edge and allowed us to make the decision much easier. So it went from being like, but we gotta keep some of the stores and like we can't close them all. That would be hard. We can't stop doing this thing. This thing should be fixed. Like we can't just kill it. And then we killed it. And it didn't happen overnight, to be completely clear, but it did happen very quickly. Um, closed our last. We have one flagship store remaining in Nashville. We will keep that one open forever. It's on Broadway in downtown. It's a great store. I love it. Makes money. It's a really great brand asset, but that's what it is for us. So like even at that store, like we overhire, we pay employees a lot to work there. The goal being that customer service is really high, the experience for the customer is really good. People see it, experience it, maybe they'll go buy it in Publix. Like that's the goal. The goal is not to make money. And I think when we were stuck in between business models, it was really hard for us to focus, and it was also really hard for us to make any decision. And that pivot, honestly, and that learning is what allowed us to then pivot really hard away from D2C a little faster than I think some other brands that should have did. Um, Hindsight being completely 2020. Like nobody knew that ads would get really expensive. Nobody knew that there'd be a lot of challenges for D2C brands in 21. But we shut off all of our ads in October of 2021. And I think the bravery of that decision came from what we went through during the pandemic, where it was like, you can shut your revenue off. You can't do that. It's bad revenue. It's not the future. You need to just move on. And the ability to move on is really hard, I think, for a lot of entrepreneurs across industries. Um, but man, it's helpful. Because like if you just learn to move on, if you have a really good product, you're iterating on your product, you're figuring out what that MVP is, like it just gives you so much freedom to just figure it out actually. When you try to fix something that is clearly broken, you can only do that for so long before you'll run out of money or you'll run out of energy and then everything's screwed.
Totally, totally. So 2021, you decide to shut off your ads. And is this at the time that you're thinking, okay, Facebook, Google is becoming way too expensive? Well, obviously, but we're gonna now pivot the business once again, or add another sales channel in when it comes to let's try to get ourselves into retail.
Yes, that year was actually interesting. Megan and I didn't do anything on LinkedIn or any of the stuff until June of 2021. That was really when we like discovered the CPG community, which by the way, I think is the greatest, like on any social network that I've ever been a part of, the CPG community on LinkedIn is the coolest thing I've ever experienced.
I agree. I think it's great.
It is amazing. And there are a lot of really friendly people. And 2021, like right around that time, was still very early for that. Like, I think like Mark Samuel had like 5,000 followers. Like, people didn't, they hadn't like blown up yet, which was really cool. Um, and so I was able to meet a lot of these people just by like commenting on their posts, being like, and then asking questions like, so you guys selling grocery, like, what's that like? Like, what's any of this like? And in 2021, we from June until October became more and more convinced like maybe we should give it a shot. We're set up for it. The co-man that we're using says they can get us into some stores. Maybe we should try that. And it really inspired us. And I think the other thing that like really sent me over the edge is in September of 2021, I went to this little conference in Palm Springs. And at that conference, there were like only 7 other founders there. It was this tiny little thing put on by this guy named Stuart Press. Uh, and it was me, like Jake Carls, Parker Olson, who used to do Forage, a couple other founders that were really cool. Kirsten, who did Juicy Pots. Um, and those people inspired me to be like, you know what, we're doing this. Like they all seem like they're having so much fun, and like I've never done this before. We've only done D2C. We it was very obvious D2C wasn't going to work, um, and we can get into that if you want to. But I think that for specific food products, specific price points, like D2C is just not the way. Like to profit, it's definitely a really great way to acquire customers and a really great way to grow revenue. But the idea that you will ever be profitable is insane. Like we, even today, vertically integrated, if I ran the ads I would need to run to build a real D2C business, and I was a really good operator, I'd be making like 4% profit, which ironically is a lot like what Kroger makes because it's kind of what you're becoming. Like you are the vertical, like if you're completely vertically integrated, delivering a product to the customer, paying for the shipping, or you're like the Amazon. Um, you can make money. You still make a lot. And I think that to us was like, okay, like if that's not like where we can make like significant profit or EBITDA, like why we focus on it? It's definitely a great way to create customers and brand awareness. So why should we not do this other thing? Um, and that's kind of all the things that inspired that pivot. Like we also raised a crowdfunding round that year. That round was specific to D2C. We spent the money exactly how we said we would, and we lit it all on fire. I wouldn't say we lit it on fire. That's also a bad thing to say because, to be completely honest, I still meet people that saw our ads because of how many we ran, and they know our brands because of the amount of money we spent on meta ads. Um, which was like north of $1 million. And it's like, hey, if that's going to happen and it builds brand awareness, great. Um, and we may start doing that kind of stuff again. And there were other operational issues with D2C that made me not like it as a channel for our product. Um, and there's a lot of candy, like people that do chocolates and stuff that would like agree with me, where it's like you wouldn't want your customer to get your chocolate bar melted no matter what you do. If you're shipping it to like Austin, Texas in the middle of summer, your bar is probably going to melt a little bit, and then the consumer gets it, and then they're like, "Oh, this brand sucks." And that like those little things bothered me, and they bothered Megan a lot about like how our customers saw the brand when we were shipping online. But yeah, that's how the pivot kind of happened and came to be. We just ripped the band-aid off a lot faster than the first time.
Walk me through why you can't make a profit selling CPG products on D2C.
I'll just straight up tell you guys our unit economics. This is a good conversation. So our average order value at the time and still to the day, it's a little lower now. Actually, let's use the round number. So it was $44. Um, let's use 40 for a good example. So $40 average order value. The average shipping costs, well, let's start with COGS. So the average COGS on that order when we make the product are right around $10. So make the product $10. It's like labor, overhead, the whole thing. So if you look at our P&L, it wouldn't really look like this, but it's how we do the math.
So 70%, so like 75%
Yeah.
gross margins there.
And then we spend about $10 shipping it to you. It's actually like $9.70 on average when you like average it out on ShipStation, but let's call it $10.
But are you paying the average order value, that $40? Are you putting $10 over that, or is that included in the 40?
We gave free shipping. We were like
Free
free
shipping.
shipping all
Okay.
day.
Okay. Got it. Got it.
And
Got it.
you could charge for shipping. So that is something that would change this conversation up. $10 for shipping. So now you're at 50. The next thing that you will have to do is for our product specifically, you'll have to get like the ice packs, the box, the bubble bags, like all the stuff. At scale, that stuff is actually not that expensive. At scale is very big. And we were never that big. Even when we were shipping 6,000 orders a month, like that's not gonna cut it as far as like the volume you would need to buy in bulk. To lower the costs to a good place. So we were always spending like
So packaging, what are we thinking? Maybe around like $2 in order, like $1 an order? What do you think?
it's $5, which is
$5 for
terrible.
packaging. Okay.
Yeah. So now you're at $15, which sounds awesome. Once you start to get the returns, once you start to get the refund requests, once you start to get the customer service complaints, never really put a price on those, but they do cost money. And then the thing that will break the camel's back is the ads. So $15 in customer acquisition cost is amazing. Like if you can hit that and you're out there listening to this podcast, you're killing it. Like $15, $25 is amazing. Like that's a really good customer acquisition cost. The problem becomes when you literally do not have the funds in the bank to go in the hole. Because if you're focused on lifetime value, which I think you probably should be, you're gonna have to spend a little bit of money before you start to make money, before the email campaigns start to do their thing, before the retention kicks in. And if you're growing all the time, it'll never kick in because your growth will always be funded by top of funnel ads. They're very expensive. The overall customer acquisition cost for an average order is never going to be $15, not on our site. So the problem was that I truly believe to this day, if your AOV is above $100, you're golden. Like you should do e-com with your brand, whatever your product is, especially if it's like a physical good. I know people have like mixed feelings about like Casper and stuff like that. But I think like if you're
I have a Casper mattress and I love it. And I love it. I love it.
same, I love those mattresses. Every single mattress in my house is a Casper. The mattress in the school bus that I built is a Casper mattress. I really love those mattresses. But yeah, that product is a great example. Like you could spend like $500 acquiring a customer. There's no really a lot of lifetime value there, but like,
Well, that's the thing. That's the thing. Like I bought a Casper mattress now, 10 years ago, 8 years ago, right? And then I haven't bought anything from Casper since.
yeah. So like, there's not a lot of lifetime value there, but there's a really big AOV. I have another friend that sells car simulators, like racing sims, and their AOV is like 100K. And so like they can spend quite a bit of money like acquiring a customer. And people aren't necessarily going to have a lot of like lifetime value for them, but they can figure out where the niche is and they can spend like a significant amount of money to acquire a customer. On the flip side, if you have the money and you like have the runway, then like it's a really good acquisition strategy to like create brand. Like it just is. Or if you're one of those out there that are like a straight up unicorn to me and you're selling like AG1 and it's like tiny little packets, it goes in the mail and it's over $100, like man, and it's a subscription, like whoa,
Yeah. Like limit.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
now you're
Yeah.
killing
Like
it.
element and everything.
Yes.
Yeah. Totally.
Like those
Totally.
things kill it. And it's like you have to understand like your product, who you are, what's going to work for you. And for us and for a refrigerated thing, it's a bad customer experience. It's expensive. And we're never really going to make that much money on it. So it'd be better to focus on something else. The irony of that is it still is not lost on me that the best customer acquisition we ever did was during that time. And we are actually currently working on something that will hopefully resurrect that in a way that I think will work based on an idea that we had back in like 2020 that at the time was not possible. And today, in 2025, technology is advanced. It currently exists. But I will tell people about that when it happens. It hopefully will be really cool. But we're trying to make it so that people can get their cookie dough the same day if they order it online, which will be great. I will love that.
My final question to you, Jimmy, is what do you value more? $100 of COGS, $100 of NoBaked Cookie Dough COGS, or $100 cash.
Like, what do I personally value more? The COGS. The COGS,
Love
my
it.
friends.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Love it. Because then
Sell that.
that's awesome. That's great.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I thought about that question way too long. I was like, wait, what? I was like, oh yeah.
No, not at all. Not at all. That was great. Jimmy, honestly, man, I feel like we could probably go for like another hour. There's so much to cover, but this was so great having you on our show. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. And if I could just like do my like personal plug real quick, check me out on LinkedIn. You can find me at Jimmy Feeman. You can find me on X, find me on Instagram, all those places. And also, you can find NoBaked on all of these platforms, just at NoBaked. It's NOBAKED. And we are doing a crowdfunding round soon. So if you check us out, maybe when this episode airs, you can click the link in bio and see if you can own a piece of the dream.
Love it. I love that. And we will definitely include it. And then also when you do launch it, the campaign, please let us know because more than happy to also distribute it.
I definitely will.
Like that. So
it's cool. Gonna be very limited. So it's very capped at a low amount of money. It's just kind of what we need to raise right now to do some strategic things that we're working on. And I'm excited to do it.
Awesome. That's great. Well, amazing. Thanks so much for sharing your journey. Really appreciate it. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Mike.
And there you have it. It was a pleasure chatting with Jimmy. Jimmy, thanks again so much for coming on the show. If you're enjoying the show, please hit that subscribe button and like it. Thank you for MFD for producing this podcast. MFD is the inventory success platform. We help companies source, manufacture, finance their inventory in retail channels. Thanks for listening.